thank you for joining us today. My name is Crosby. I am the Development and Events Coordinator here at Habitat for Humanity of Metro Denver. In just a few moments, we will hear from Habitat Metro Denver CEO, Heather Lafferty, and a very special guest, former Denver City Councilman, Albus Brooks. Throughout the course of today's town hall, you may submit questions to Heather and Albus through the chat function. I'm sure we're all familiar with Zoom by now, but I will review. So on the bottom of your screen, you should see a black Zoom toolbar. You can click on the icon called chat. Pardon me, sorry about that. That looks like a cartoon speech bubble. You should then see a drop-down menu with a downward-facing arrow that will let you choose where to send your message. Send all questions about today's town hall to questions at any time during the program. This is the only channel that will be monitored for questions. For any issues about Zoom or other technical issues, you can please send your message to tech support. Please know that chat to other hosts will not be monitored. Thank you so much for helping us get to as many questions as possible by using that chat feature today. With that, I would like to introduce Heather Lafferty.
Thank you, Crosby, and thank you all for joining us. This is an amazing turnout. We've got several hundred people joining us for today's discussion, which is just outstanding. I personally can't think of a better way to spend this beautiful snowy morning than gathered virtually with all of you. So thank you for feeling the same way. I am really thrilled that so many of our volunteers, homeowners, donors, and community partners want to learn more about the history of housing segregation and discrimination and its continued impact today. Plus, we will talk about what needs to be done to change the future. We believe that it is important for Habitat to elevate these discussions like we are today because of our own history, values, and vision. So I'm going to take just a moment to share a few points of context on that before I introduce our speaker, Albus Brooks, in just a moment. So a couple points to kind of just set the foundation for us today. As many of you know, Habitat for Humanity is more than a nonprofit housing organization. We have a vision of a world where we share one humanity, and we fight to achieve that by ensuring that everyone has a decent place to live. Some of you know, Habitat was born on Koinonia Farm, a place in South Georgia in the mid-1960s. On this farm, Black and white people lived in community. They worked together, they broke bread together, prayed together, and were paid the same wages. Think about this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion were all present on that farm during a time, the 1960s, in a place, South Georgia, where that seemed pretty radical. In fact, it was seen by some as an existential threat. Yet, their theory of radical inclusivity set the stage for Habitat's mission and work today. This is part of our DNA, and it really truly remains a vivid part of our vision for the future. Second point to share, and that is around the bigger context. Historic discrimination in US housing policy, particularly discrimination against Black Americans, is one of the chief drivers of the racial inequities that persist today. Policy at federal, state, and local levels all contributed to the problem. The result that we see today, that housing inequality is a primary culprit behind the large and unfortunately growing racial wealth gap between Black and white households in the United States. It's important for organizations like Habitat that work on housing. We must understand that history, and it must inform our work moving forward. And finally, Habitat works with communities and households of color here in our community, across the country and around the world. And many have experienced the generational disparity that leaves them unstable, in unstable and unaffordable housing. 2/3 of Habitat homeowners here in the metro area have households of color, and all are first-time homebuyers, some first-generation homebuyers. In a state like Colorado, the third least affordable state in the nation, and in a metro area where 1 in 6 households pay more than 50% of their monthly income on housing, it is clear we have a lot of work to do. Our values, including equity, dignity, inclusivity, and partnership, they drive us to build and preserve affordable homes, which provide a foundation from which so much is possible. And we're fortunate to see that every day. We have done this work for more than 40 years here, and I promise you, we will not stop until we have achieved our ultimate goal. So thank you for your support and your commitment. And I'm taking your commitment just by joining us today to want to be a part of helping Habitat and our community build a more inclusive future. So with that context, I am delighted to introduce you to Albus Brooks, who is the Vice President for Business Development and Strategy for Melinda White. Albus started his career by pursuing his calling for community development by working with young people in some of Denver's poorest communities. He served as the director of the Issachar Center for Urban Leadership, an organization that invests in Denver's emerging leaders. In 2010, Albus worked to elect then Mayor John Hickenlooper as governor of Colorado. That political exposure to political leadership, I should say, is what really led him to seek public office on his own. And in 2011, Albus was elected to the Denver City Council. He served 2 terms on council, including 2 terms as council president. Albus led an ambitious legislative agenda. And he accomplished many things as a city council member. But the thing that I want to point out today, and the opportunity that I had to work with him, was in co-creating Denver's first and Colorado's largest affordable housing fund to address the ongoing housing crisis facing too many people and neighborhoods in Denver. So I could go on about his accomplishments, but let me summarize a few key points of his illustrious bio. First, Albus has served in government, so in public, in nonprofit, and in the private sector. Now he's working with a construction company that is focused on affordable housing. He's also was an ordained minister and a CU Buffs football player. A really interesting combination of experiences. He is a loving father and husband, and his family lives in the Cole neighborhood in Northeast Denver, which is an area that has faced involuntary displacement of many Black and Brown neighbors. So Albus has a unique combination of experiences and perspectives to help us all learn more about both the history of racism in housing and a vision for a better future. So thank you, Albus, for joining us today.
Heather, thank you so much. And Habitat for Humanity, it is awesome to be with you. I just got to tell you something about your leader. She is exceptional at sitting at policy tables and debating, and also inspiring at the community level. And I've been with her several times, being in the community. I remember the last time we were together, Heather, we were breaking ground and actually putting hammers to nails in the amazing Swansea neighborhood, building that project. And so thank you for being a grass tops and grassroots leaders. That's what we need today. We don't see that much anymore. And so I appreciate it. I'm going to get started and share my screen. And Heather, I just want to make sure that you just let me know when you can see everything.
That looks good. You might want to go back one slide.
Okay, here we go. How's that looking?
All good. Thanks, Albus.
Okay, great. So like Heather said, my name is Albus Brooks. Just a little funny thing. My name is actually, it actually means white. Clearly, I'm not white. You know, it's a Latin word, white, but it comes from a Ghanaian tradition that my parents put together. Albert and Buster are my two grandfathers. Fun dinner party. When you go to a dinner party, you ask who your two grandfathers and put your names together. Glad it wasn't Bustle. I'm grateful it went the other way to Albus, and so I'm excited to share a little bit about rebuilding the American city. If you think you've probably heard a lot about I'm a city builder, I want to build the city. I call it rebuilding, and our last year together in COVID and everything we went through this summer with George Floyd should really help you to see that we need to rebuild our cities. And we're going to talk about the history of that real quick. So no matter what you view, what happened on the streets in every city in America, I want you to take a step back and look and reflect upon Martin Luther King's words. A riot is the language of the unheard. And there are, you know, a lot of opinions that came out. Why are these people destroying their own neighborhoods? Why is there so much destruction and violence? And to be quite honest, I am led by peace, but I could understand the frustration and the violence. But more than that, I want to know why. Why do people feel unheard, misunderstood in our communities? And that's what I want to dive in with you guys today. You know, we could talk about a lot. I could talk about 400 years of slavery in our country. We could talk about the Jim Crow South and all these other issues. But I want to focus on one piece of legislation that everybody on this call probably agrees with, and it's something that we support. And let's go to World War II. And my grandfather got a chance to fight in World War II as a Black man. Most of you guys probably don't know, Blacks were actually not on the front lines in World War II. Black soldiers had to build and dig latrines for white soldiers. They were the service soldiers. And my grandfather was a part of the first infantry that was able to really cross the color line in World War II. But one of the things this country did, and which we all agree with, was the GI Bill. The GI Bill supported these soldiers because of their time away and gave them benefits when they came back to America. It actually started and subsidized suburban sprawl, and individuals were able to invest in their community and buy a home and really stretch out because of their service to this country, except for 1.2 million Black soldiers who were denied their benefits simply because of the color of their skin. Now, some of y'all are like, there's no way. Yes way. Our legislators from the South said that they would support this bill if it didn't support Black soldiers because they were not on the same scale as white soldiers. Yes, that's our country. Federal policies that had a detrimental effect years to come that we're still seeing. So on one side of America, you see the wealth gap, the GI Bill, the benefits. You see white flight from urban communities. We subsidize sprawl. We begin to see political representation. I already had seen it in this country. Intergenerational wealth, sentencing leniencies, access to higher education, access to healthcare, which equaled compounding interest in gain for one section of our country. And in Black America, you saw redlining. We're going to talk about redlining in just a minute. You saw eminent domain in urban communities. You saw condemnation laws. You saw urban renewal. blighting communities, destroying communities, and pushing Blacks into one section of the city. You saw race riots, Jim Crow laws, voter disenfranchisement, mass incarceration, health disparities, exclusion from the GI Bill of 1.2, what I just talked about, wage gap, which equaled compounding loss and pain. And those of you who are finance folks, you understand what compound interest is in both ways. When you have compound interest and it's coming to you, it's not at the same level. It builds, right? And when you have to pay that, it builds as well. And so it has been building, and I'm going to talk about it all the way until today, what we see in Denver, Colorado, and in the metro area. This is where we find ourselves. So, what do we do with this? I love this picture because it demonstrates so many well-meaning folks, right? Look at this young lady. She's looking over the city. She's dreaming of all the things the city can be, and she's not really reflecting on all the things the city was and were, and what allowed the city to be this way, and what barriers was set up for certain types of individuals. For us to turn the dial and go in another direction and achieve equity, which I'm going to explain, we must always take sides. Neutrality, when we're quiet and silent, helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. I'm really going to encourage you all today to move from neutrality, move from silence, and move into a position of an ally, a position of pushing the envelope and letting your voice be heard in your context, because we have been silent far too long about the issues going on today. So the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna provoke you for sure about some things that are going on, but I want you to be educated. And the best the best book, I think, around understanding the development of cities and how we intentionally segregated our cities, wrote in laws, federal laws, state laws, city laws, and segregation is the color of law. It will blow your mind, and it will show you a level of white supremacy that I think will make you sit down and say, okay, we've got to dismantle this. And so, I don't think the wounds of injustice they're not easily healed, but healing begins when we begin to learn from our mistakes and build up a new system. Let's dive in deep a little bit about how this works, how segregation kind of works in our cities and has been at work, and how it was designed. So anti-Black racial entropy, for folks to really understand this is, I want to put it in plain day. We're seeing this right now in Denver schools, as my kids are all a part of DPS. Once it's evidence-based practices that once you get a certain number of people of color in a certain school or certain organization, you begin to see white flight. And it's this belief that the separation from people of color, and specifically Black people, we need to move away from that, and white flight happens. And as you can see here, this entropy still exists today. I see it in our school system. I see it in our housing system. I see it in our communities. And it's something that needs to be dealt with. And the conversation needs to be happening in white circles, that this is not okay. This is not, and it repeats cycles of 50 years ago. But now we're just doing it silently and thinking it's okay that I live in an all-white environment and I'm not comfortable with these neighbors. I'm not comfortable in these schools. I don't want my kids to grow up in this environment. And we repeat the cycle. Then you get this spatial mismatch theory. And this is what happens when, okay, the white flight has happened out of this particular neighborhood because of these particular issues. Now the resources that were in this neighborhood now follow, where the white flight is taking place and where the wealth is going. I see this all the time in real estate. When I was fighting hard to get grocery stores in a particular neighborhood, the algorithms that these grocery stores would put in place and what they knew about the neighborhood, they're like, hey, you'll be there in 5 years when it gentrifies to this level. Then I can come in because I know that your median income is going to be at 75,000. I fought that all the time. So this isn't just this. I'm not telling you something that is my feelings. I'm showing you evidence-based practices and real-time data from what I was working on. And then lastly is the culture of poverty theory. Now, this is powerful because this is what happens when over time, white flight has happened, segregation of resources, spatial mismatch theory has happened. And now over time, white elitists look back and say, you know what they need? They need more dads in their homes. You know what? They need this. They need that. They need an issue. And they've never really seen that they have been a part of the breaking down of this community the entire time because of the policies and the fears that are in place. This is the city, the current state of our cities in America. So what do we do about it? How do we address it? Now, Heather said that I was a former minister, a recovering pastor. And the deepest part of me, the most important piece of me is the spiritual person deep inside of me, right? Like if I don't have that awakened, I can't do much of anything. And I want to submit to you today that if you're going to be about this work and you're going to be about transforming our city, it has to be something deeper than anger. It has to be something deeper than, I just want to help some people out, right? It has to come from a deep place, a deep spiritual place, a deep love, a deep affection for the community that we're serving. And one of the things I loved was this word shalom, which is a Hebrew word. And a lot of people think it means peace. It's so much more than that. It's restoration. It's repairing. It's building an inclusive prosperity and making sure everyone is a part of this life, right? But what I love most is it's about repairing. And so if you look at our cities, if you go into neighborhoods and your heart doesn't break, right? Your heart doesn't like say, oh, I want to see, by the way, reparations comes from repairing. We won't dive into that today, but just, I want you to reflect on that if you can't go to that level of empathy and compassion of repairing, I submit to you, I think you need to check all of that, right? We need to come to the table with this attitude of restoration and repairing and bringing back what was lost. And so one of my mantras is in Jeremiah 29:7 is seeking the shalom of the city, seeking the inclusive prosperity of the city, seeking the restoration. Now, so we move from that spiritual place into the very tactical, strategic place of we gotta bring new plans. We have to redesign. We have to rebuild. How do we do that? Our city planners. One of the things I did when I was at the city is really push our city planners to think outside of the context in the box which they had developed around their outreach and around understanding the cities and into a more urban context of what our Black and Brown communities were thinking about, our churches, our community members. I had in Park Hill and in Northeast Denver, I had to meet with some ex-gang members to really understand the street level, what was going on in the neighborhood. And that is where we need to push our folks. They have to see the entire community if they're really going to be planners for the city. Redesign. I think our designers need to be thinking away the built environment is not just for those who can afford it, but all of the community as we rebuild the community. Right now, our organization is building a new, and we're so excited about this, homeless facility downtown. One of the things our sub partners are going to be doing is hiring formerly incarcerated individuals within our city, and also hiring formerly homeless individuals to be a part of the success, the economic success of these construction projects. It's rethinking and using these tools in our community. All right. Does anybody know who this is? See, we're not really doing a call and response because there's so many of y'all on here, but this is Nipsey Hussle, and he's the one with the chains on and got the scissors. And I love this picture because Nipsey on this block in LA, and unfortunately Nipsey Hussle was killed. Um, he was selling drugs on this block many years ago, and the owners of the block continue to call the police on him. And one time sitting in jail, he said, "You know what? I can't keep getting upset about the gentrification going on in my community. I need to buy the entire block." And so Nipsey Hussle, and this is him when he purchased the entire block of the community of the individuals who were calling the police on him. And he purchased the entire block and said, "We need to buy our hood back. We need to gentrify our own hood." And I just thought it was powerful because you don't hear that all the time in our community. You don't hear this level of how do we build Black wealth? How do we build and how do we buy back the block and actually do it? And so his organization is employing Black-owned businesses and things like that in his community, which had been completely gentrified. And I think it's an incredible model of what we need to look at. Building affordable housing for displaced neighbors. One of the things that I saw is we created something, close to 3,000 to 5,000 units in my tenure on downtown. And one of the things we saw was young people in the workforce were extremely confident and could come in here and get affordable housing location, but single mothers were not on that list. Single mothers were somehow in the community who had been displaced were not being a part of this. And so HUD, different cities begin to work with HUD to make sure of a first right of refusal for displaced residents. And we were working on that in the city of Denver. I believe we had that passed, and it's in the city of San Francisco and Portland, but that is something that we need to push for and make sure that the folks who have been displaced get an opportunity to come back to their neighborhoods. This particular location is a powerful, powerful story. And I'm gonna let Heather talk about Habitat for Humanity's potential role in it in the future. But this location was owned by Douglas Bruce. Douglas Bruce, if you don't know, is the architect of Tabor for the state of Colorado. He was a slumlord. This is about 800 feet from my home. And I witnessed the years of degradation that this property brought to the city of Denver. Because he was acquiring liens on the property for not taking care of his property. When I was in office, we foreclosed on the liens on this property, and the bank took it back, and it was an auction, and we got some individuals in here who want to create an inclusive community. This is called the Clara Brown Commons. If you don't know who Clara Brown is, write her name down, Google her. She is a great Coloradoan and a great American hero, former slave, became a millionaire, gave all her money away to poor folks. And we're calling this the Clara Brown Commons, which is going to be a fully inclusive neighborhood. And it's so excited to see. There's tiny homes on them right now, which is really exciting to see. Creating entrepreneurial centers specifically for people of color. Some people get mad at that when I say that. And I just want to say equity is strategically and intentionally investing back in what was taken. And in our communities, there was wealth taken, there was opportunities taken, and we need to strategically and very, very aggressively, I think, pour back into our communities. And creating an entrepreneurial center of color is something that we've been talking about in the city of Denver for a long time. There's some activity in the works and 5 Points in putting this together, but where we can provide technical support from a city perspective, we can bring in capital for capital partners who want to invest in Black and brown communities. You just saw JP Morgan Chase announced that they are investing 30 billion into Black and brown businesses and communities and entrepreneurs. And this is something that we think will be very, very powerful. Many of you all know the story of 5 Points, and if you don't, 5 Points was a red line community, and I didn't talk a ton about redline. It's in the color of law, but redlining is a community that we basically have forced, through city laws, state laws, and federally, people of color into a section of the city where they couldn't move anywhere else. They could not get the capital. They could not get bank loans to move anywhere else. And 5 Points was a section of our city. You can look at, you can Google redlining in Denver to see all the sections of the city. Interestingly enough, if you look today, these are all the neighborhoods that are being gentrified. And so this is a cycle. It was intentional of what's been happening. But in the 5 Points community, this happened. And, I think African Americans made it amazingly. They said, listen, this is horrible. We about to make this our own home. And this became, this was the Black Renaissance. It was the jazz capital on Welton. There was incredible places. Right here is the Rossonian where Charlie Parker played, Dizzy Gillespie, Lena Horne. It was the place to be. In the 80s and 90s, it was vacant, it was desolate, and now we are seeing a rise in the Black Renaissance. And here are some individuals here. Robert Smith, billionaire, went to East High School, is investing back in this neighborhood. You see Chauncey Billups, you see some other folks here. There are now 13 properties that have been purchased by this ownership group. And what you're starting to see is this renaissance, and it's powerful, it's beautiful, and it's happening in our city. And we want to see this replicated. I've talked about a lot of stuff, but I want to leave you with this. Everybody wants to talk about the city of the future. And as I reflect and start thinking about the year that we've been through and understanding the horrible history of our communities and our cities and how they were built, I submit to you, this is the future of the city. It isn't one with flying cars and towers that reach the heavens. It's about the regenerative ecosystems, the inclusive economies, the just societies where equity and social mobility go hand in hand. That is what we're fighting for. That, when we reach that level, I think that is where we will look around and say, okay, we're finally doing it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Albus. There was so much good information in what you just shared. And I always appreciate your passion for not only where we've been and understanding that, but where we've got to go. And I just, thank you. I always learn something when I get to listen to you speak. So I appreciate that. For our audience, please go ahead and send in some questions to our questions in the chat, and we are going to do our best to get to as many questions or answers as possible in our remaining time. I also just want to turn your attention, don't leave us right now, but we have put a few resources in the chat, specifically a follow-up to Albus's reference to the Color of Law book. There is a great video called Segregated by Design. So really, if you want to get into the history and a lot, it's a dense book, but let me tell you, it's got so much good information, heartbreaking information in there, but is so important for us to understand. So Albus, thank you. I'm going to ask one of my own questions just to get us started as some of our audience questions are rolling in. And can you just talk a little bit more? I mean, Habitat is focused on home ownership, providing affordable home ownership. And so much of what you talked about touches on this. But can you just share your own perspective and why you think that our community really needs good, affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually a huge advocate, and I know you are, in home ownership. And I feel like you guys bring so much to the table because you are working with working class individuals and the working poor to achieve home ownership. And I don't know another organization that's doing that. And I got to be honest, when, I first got to Denver, I was lucky to purchase a home for 190 grand, right, in the cold neighborhood. And so that is non-existent right now. And I am unapologetically about building Black wealth right now in our communities. And I think this is a great opportunity in home ownership to build that wealth at a at a level much lower than market rate, at an affordable level. I think what I want to encourage you guys with is, now, how do we scale that? Right? How do we take that to the next level of what you all are doing? It is so important. Um, how do you take it to the next level and build on it? And for those folks who are in ownership, how do you build their wealth in other areas, right? Expose them to new partnerships. We are, one of the things that we're looking at in the 5 points area is creating, we don't know what kind of fund we're going to call it, where community members can invest their own money into a fund and receive a return, just like other folks do. And so I just think there's so much stuff that we can be exposing people to, and providing opportunities and helping people find their power, and that wealth brings that power.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Talking about what's happened in 5 points in coal, and just really thinking about the involuntary displacement that has happened. And since I don't know what it was you bought your first home, but I know the change in my own neighborhood in Northwest Denver has been similar over the last 20 years. I mean, how do we build in a way that creates opportunities for those who've been pushed out or excluded?
Sorry, I was muted. How are we muting ourselves after a year of doing this? So I I this is such a hard, and I'm like emotionally, tied to this topic because, when I was elected, before I was elected, the census came out in 2010, and 80205 was ranked the top 10 most gentrified zip codes. And I mean, it was, so we were talking about it then, we're really talking about it now, even though we're late in it, and we're not talking about the whole history of it. And as someone who is incredibly passionate about this, and have family members, have friends, have community members who have been pushed out, um, it's incredibly painful, right? And then you, as an elected official, you look at the tools that you have, and you look at the amount of time that you have, and you're like, man, anything I put in place, I'm not even affecting people for 10 to 15 years. And because I am a pro growth individual, a lot of my own communities were blaming me for what had happened in that, right? And so I think for me, I said this before: strategic, intentional, and aggressive is what we need to be about. I think, communities, when they're working with policymakers, they don't think, okay, well, if we enact this policy in a year and a half, we won't see the effects of it for 10 years, but that's the reality, right? And so I think we need ground level, tactical opportunities. I think we need policy opportunities. It has to be level. It cannot be, this is Can you guys hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Somebody muted me. They're like, "We done with you. We done with you." Um, and so, in looking, just in my time as a community organizer, in my time as a council person, now in the private sector, it has to be multifaceted.
Mhm.
And I think there are a lot of folks who are like, no, we need to do this. No, we need to do all of it, right? And we need to do all of it now. And we need to be unapologetic about doing all of it now and pushing it forward. And we need to collaborate. I see so much division around what to do, how to do it, when to do it, instead of acting fast now. And so that would just be my encouragement in seeing, the highs and lows, the wins and the losses is to really be collaborative and unified in our push towards this.
So Albus, let me follow up. We have a question coming in from someone in our audience who says, and this is just kind of a continuation maybe of what you just shared. As someone who lives in a gentrified neighborhood, I'd love some solid next steps for how to focus my intentions and attentions on in my community. And so you just talked about strategic, intentional, aggressive, and tactical opportunities. Can you just throw out, maybe one or two that might be at the top of your list for someone like our audience member here who wants to be more involved?
Yeah, so you can't do it on your own. Number one, I think if you want to do anything significant in this city, you got to be collaborative. And so I think joining forces with people who are already active doing something, I think is the first thing to do. There are a lot of people doing work in your neighborhood. I'll tell you that right now. If you didn't know this now, we love to be siloed in this country, right? You're seeing it all over the place. Get out of your silo, partner with someone else, and get to work. And I think the greatest example is my own neighborhood. Um, just kept looking around. We saw this vacant lot. We saw it was owned by Douglas Bruce. That got us fired up. Now, it took a long time, unfortunately, right? But guess what? There are homeless people living there right now, people who are on the street, and that feels amazing. And there's plans for home ownership, and there's plans for all these other things. And so I had to partner with some folks that made me an unlikely partner. It's not always when you partner, it's not always what you think, because partnering says you're giving up a piece to come together, something that we don't like to do right now in America. But that is what it takes. And so, do a lot of work, do your homework in the neighborhood, see who's doing the good work, see who you should be partnering with, and get to work.
Another question that's just come in, and if you can think back to your slides, but he'd like to know about what you think are the most devastating effects from the layered web of impoverishment that you referred to in the how segregation impacts the city's economy slide.
I think 100% black entropy. This feeling, because I can't tell. It's hidden, right? It's not hidden in your actions, but it's hidden in the heart. And America has this deep within the soul of it, and it's never been addressed. And until we get to that, I mean, it doesn't matter what we do. We're going to continue to deal with this ugliness of, in this race conversation. We're doing it with our company, and we had a guy, the other day just say, well, I mean, everybody should love each other. I was like, yeah, they should, but they don't. And we have a history that demonstrates that there's inequality, right? And so we have to address that. I always believe it starts deep within. It's not the action. By the time you get to the action, it's too late, right? And so that's what I think is the most devastating. And then I think as you start to look at some of these laws, and we can just take one family member who maybe he was 19 years old. He fought in World War II, came back broke and not able to invest in the future for his family. Let's follow that compounding negative interest in his life. Our country just took a wealth generator away from that individual, right? That cannot be denied. So I could go on this, so I better stop.
No, this is really great. We have so many good questions coming in. Thank you to those who are listening, and we'll be capturing all of these, even if I don't have a chance to ask them all. Thank you for that. Alice, you just talked a little bit about laws, and so let me ask another question that just came in at a policy level. What are some of the specific impediments and challenges for affordable housing, and what ideas do you have to address some of those challenges?
Woo, we got another hour? Or,
Exactly.
so I think it's one thing to be an elected official. It's another deal to actually put a deal together that's an affordable housing thing. And so every time I see someone who is just an old school affordable housing, I just go give them a hug and a kiss, because we've made that system so difficult um, to build affordable housing. And, from tax credits to city issues, city impediments. Why are affordable housing? I'm gonna start calling out my city that I work for. Why are affordable housing people paying permits on their and these permits, just so you know, because I thought the permits weren't that much, right? These permits are expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tap fees. Why are we doing this? Um, we can put that on to market. Those who want to do market rate, you got to pay for it, right? And so I just I think that is absolutely asinine, and it builds up the impediments. And that's not even policy. That is um, that's that you don't. I don't have to pass a law for that. That can be done within CPD. That can be done within Public Works. That can be done within Denver Water, right? Immediately. So I think that's what I do immediately. I think other things is, we've got to figure out we're a market rate, construction company and a development side, and around 30% of our housing is affordable housing. But we got to figure out, it's a value to us. We got to figure out how more market rate individuals will do an inclusion of affordable housing, and not 80% or 90%. Hey man, I obviously getting down in that workforce housing model is really important. And so I think those things are important. I mean, we're in a housing crisis before the pandemic. Now it's beyond ridiculous where we're at. The good news is we're starting to see bipartisan support for an increase in tax credits, federal tax credits, that may come. I know we can't believe Republicans and Democrats are going to be agreeing on anything, but we're starting to see that from the federal level. We're starting to see some big legislation come at the state and city level around inclusionary housing. And so I think there's going to be some moves and shifts, but it'd be interesting to see how it's delivered.
Mhm. Another question, and this kind of takes it in the flip side of this, but we always love the positive of Habitat. The question is, what are other examples of what we're doing well in Denver or maybe in the metro area regarding housing equity? This person is asking because the momentum is so important and it's worth repeating initiatives that are going well. So what do you see? What are some of the high spots or the positives that you see?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think the city of Denver really wants housing, right? And they will do whatever they can do to get housing. And so to be spending over $50 million a year just from a city fund into housing, I never thought that was possible in 2016, right? And so this affordable housing fund, all these other funds, marijuana funds that we've put into affordable housing, doubling the fund that the mayor did. I still think there needs to be more money, right? But man, that we're here, if you do an analysis and comparative analysis to other big cities, we're doing well. There's still cities that are outshining. We still got to catch up to. Seattle's doing a great job, right? San Francisco, some of these others, Austin. But I think to be at that level, I'm proud of us, right? We got there, but it's hard, right? Too, right? I mean, all you got to do is drive the streets of Denver and see how many folks are sleeping outside. That you're like, okay, we got more work to do, and the metro area has more work to do. And I think, and I'm gonna give you an opportunity here as Habitat. Habitat is amazing, right? Everybody loves Habitat. I mean, you can't find anybody like, you know what, Habitat ain't doing nothing. No, everybody from left of the aisle to right of the aisle, black, white, everybody in between, black, brown, white. You guys have a voice that you can use, and our metro counties, our other cities are not as excited about housing, especially neighbors who come from a lower class, as Habitat is, right? And as Denver is. And it's really hurting us. They want to see less housing. They want to see, neighbors of a lower class status. The Black entropy thing is real. And to have you all in that contextual environment speaking up and saying, no, no, we're actually going to love on our neighbors. We're actually going to bring our community as an inclusive community with loving arms, because that's what makes us better. Um, if you guys didn't know, there's actually a return on equity and investment if you are more inclusive, a 300% return. You're a better company, you're a better city, you produce more, you're smarter, your teams perform better. Why do we like to be by ourselves and how we look and how we think? We need more diverse communities. And so I could go on that, but I would just say that.
Well, thank you. I love that, love on our neighbors, because that's, again, it goes back to where Habitat started. And I feel like that is the essence of who we are and who we want to continue to be, and to be better at. So thank you. Thank you for that, that visual and that idea. We are close to time. I'm going to try to jam in a few more questions because they're coming in fast and
Can I just give a shout out to my boy, Michael Mieta? How are you, brother? I see you.
Great. So you just we were talking a little bit on the policy side, and zoning is often something that comes up in these conversations, whether it's part of the problem or part of the solution. And as you talk about not just Denver, but the metro area, I'm curious, kind of what would be your suggestions or thoughts in that space? I know cities like Minneapolis and Portland have eliminated single family zoning. I know you and I talked about this one time many years ago, and your comment was, whoa, there's a little bit more political will on that. But here we are in 2021. I'm just curious, from the built environment standpoint, are there policies or changes that you could see making a difference?
As soon as Minnesota passed it, I was actually talking to their president of city council, and I said, man, I could maybe pass that in my district, but you got 11 other districts, and I think there's a lot of pushback, but you absolutely need that. You absolutely need more opportunities. I think the city council did a great job in adopting the group living deal, which ticked people off. And I don't get it. It's like, what do y'all think is going to happen? We're already doing short-term rentals in our cities. Like, understand people want an option to live. And I just think with duplexes and opportunities like this, you cheapen, you lower the bar for individuals to get an investment in on a property. And I think it's incredibly important. So I'll start there. I would be an advocate for single family. I'm a big advocate, and I know that community members get upset by this, but I'm a supply and demand individual, right? And so if we stop the number of housing, the cost goes up. I mean, it's a simple supply and demand. If we increase the number of housing, we can start to see the price level out. And if we can demand that, if you go higher and things like that. So we've passed a number of things, and I will continue to push in that area. I think they need to be adjusted, right, to make sure that we're using 2015 numbers. It's 2021. We need to adjust those numbers on our height amendments for these areas near transit. But yes, density is something that's so important, and inclusion of affordable housing in all those properties is important.
Yeah.
So just putting a final exclamation mark on it. land use is the single most important policy indicator and important tool that you can use for affordable housing.
Great summary. Is that actually gets me to maybe the last question. You might have just answered it, but I do want to just make sure. Obviously, this is so complex. So to summarize, my final question was going to be, if you had a magic wand, what would be the number one thing you would change in order to improve housing affordability for low and moderate income households?
Oh, man. I would say, people like zoning because there's predictability. And I would say that if, depending on the level of the depth of affordability, that you could move the levers of zoning and they will be flexible dependent upon the depth of affordability that you offer. For instance, I'm in a 5-story zoning. And let's just use Habitat for Humanity, as an example. Maybe you guys are in the Swansea neighborhood and you say, listen, we can affect more individuals if we go to a 3-story zoning, and we'll go down, 50-60% AMI, all of our housing. Now we're not just in a single family housing zone. Now we can double our impact of individuals. Now there's people next door. You can't, it's going to be cars and it's going to be, listen, people are hurting out here and they deserve access to an incredible community just like you. So I would put a land use flexibility indicator on there for affordable housing. That's when we're serious about it. Man, when you come in to the desk at City of Denver at CPD and say, hey, I'm providing affordable housing, there's a whole nother list of opportunities and incentives that you can go through. And no, it freaks a lot of our engineers and our planners out. But I think when we get to that level, I think we're really serious. And when we get to the level of like now, right, offices are empty, right? We need to start converting them into housing opportunities. But to do that, we do a lot of renovations at our shop. It's difficult, very difficult. A lot of fire issues, with the city. And so make sure the life safety is taken care of, but having an opportunity, an on-ramp with the city of Denver to start rehabbing these buildings into housing units is going to be incredibly important.
Albus, I know you and I could sit and talk about this for hours.
Boy,
there's so much to talk about and it's so important. I just really want to thank you for the thought-provoking and just really insightful perspective that you have shared. I've certainly learned from you, continue to learn from you, and it certainly put an extra urgency in my heart. I did want to share kind of my 3 top takeaways, and I know we're really at time here, but as we think about next steps with Habitat, and we're such an action-oriented group, our volunteers and partners, as you talk about shalom, that what just that sits for me is that we just need to find ways to increase opportunities for home ownership for our Black and brown neighbors, and that loving our neighbor comes out so strong with that. The stability that housing provides and the economic mobility that home ownership provides is critical. My second thing is we've got to get out of our silo. Thank you for that language. We've invested in historically redlined communities, and we really need to do that better in partnership so that we're all bringing more to the table. And the final takeaway for me is that compounding impact and Habitat's voice, and pulling those 2 things together, thinking about land use and how we look at that going forward. It is a heavy lift, but honestly, our goals aren't going to be achieved unless we figure that out. So thank you for that. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. I really hope this discussion has given you something to chew on and to think about as you walk away and are compelled to do more. We are so grateful that, whether you're new to this conversation about racial equity in housing, or if you could have done this presentation yourself, I really hope that you heard something and feel that urgency. An easy way, we had some questions about how to get involved. An easy way is to visit our website and to see all the unique opportunities to volunteer, to advocate, and to donate. You really can make a difference. We are all in this together, and I look forward to working with you to achieve a more inclusive community together. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.